name is Dave Orleans. I lived in New Jersey pretty much all of my life until we moved away in 2005. I retired. For 30 years, I worked as a park naturalist for Camden County Parks, and I had a little nature center, a one-room nature center in Berlin. I was born in Washington, D.C., but at the age of 4 moved to North Jersey and lived in New Jersey pretty much until my 50s. And haven't been really back since, other than to come and visit. But I guess I moved to South Jersey. Well, let's put it this way. I learned about Whitesbog when I was in the Army. That's my first experience with Whitesbog, but I was stationed at Fort Dix as a medic in 1971, 70 and 71. And then upon learning about Whitesbog, which I'll talk about later, I talked to someone there and found out that Glassboro had a master's program in environmental education, and I wasn't quite sure if that's what my career path was going to be, but in getting out of the Army, I applied to the graduate program at Glassboro and went through that program, and in the meantime got the job as a naturalist. So eventually finished my degree, my master's there in environmental education, and then started working as a naturalist. Somewhere along the way, about 1969, I met my wife. We got married, 79 rather, 78, 79. We got married, had 2 kids, and at that point, my wife Sarah was working for Dr. Vivian at CESC, Conservation and Environmental Studies Center, and we lived in Berlin for a while. Then eventually we got the opportunity to live at Whitesbog, and we lived at the Whitmer Stone Cottage, is what it was called back then. It's the superintendent's house, I guess. So we lived there for about 3 or 4 years and had a first-hand look at the village itself. Got to know the people there, and Sarah was involved with, she worked at CESC doing classes, but also at some point they had started doing environmental assessment work for different townships in South Jersey, writing up, I guess, natural resource inventory type stuff. During the time we were there was a changeover in administration, in that Whitesbog Trust was created, and their offices were down at Sun and Give. CESC was at the general store, and at that point I became really interested in the history of Whitesbog. Well, I'd always been interested in it from a layman's point of view, and I was always interested in what history of Whitesbog, but also I lost my train of thought. At any rate, a lot happened there at that point, where in some ways CESC and Whitesbog Trust were not friendly at first, I guess. But then after Dr. Vivian ended CESC and turned it into another whole entity from his helm, there was I think both my wife and I realized that there was some need for continuation of environmental education at Whitesbog. And Gary Patterson basically was the head of Pines, but in a lot of ways Sarah was the first on-site director, and I did a lot of the artwork. The logo for Pines is one that I drew, and actually, I guess, in some ways made up the name Pines. although I always had envisioned it as Pinelands Institute for Environmental Studies, and the IN came from Institute, IN Institute. But Gary Patterson thought that was too woo-woo, I guess. I don't know. Too much license. So he said it probably should be just called Natural and Environmental Studies. So that's where the Pines initials, that's what they were meant from then on. I guess to just, before we go heavy into anything, I'll just say that we were involved, we were there, living there, and had our two kids. My son was born while we were there in '85, and a couple of years later we got our first real house with a mortgage and all that. Moved to Pine Hill, and I stayed in my job. And when I retired in 2005, Sarah had already gotten a job in Portland, Oregon, as the director of a children's museum here. So she brought us there. Our kids were all grown, and they stayed and have since both ended up in North Carolina. But we stayed in Portland for 10 years, and then she got a job in suburbs of Chicago at running another children's museum, and so we moved there, and for 5 years we were there, and then came back here just in time for the lockdown and COVID. So we've been here since December of 2019. And here we are, all
Excellent.
all ensconced in our beautiful Oregon home. I was living off base with my first wife and my oldest son. He was born in 1970. We were living in Browns Mills, somewhere on a country road out of the main town. And when I had days off, I'd just take my car and go driving in the pines, going down all the sandy roads. I had hiked all the way out Range Road to go shoot rifles for basic training, and then when I came back as a medic at Walson Army Hospital, had time off, and I'd go driving. And one day I just went down Range Road and saw this little dirt road to the right. Took it. I think it had a road sign, Whitesbog something road or something. At any rate, I just drove down there until I came to it just opened up into this little clearing with a circle of buildings, and I thought, wow, this is like going back in time to another era. And at the time, I had been reading a little bit about communities of work, which is sort of one step up from communes, where there were actually communities that were built around an organization or a company, not just a company town, the way they describe it at Whitesbog, but the Amana community was one of them that was heavily represented in this book, where people all worked doing something, one thing for one company, and they all sort of were part owners in it and lived right with each other. So they lived and worked all together. My involvement at Whitesbog, while I was living there, I was doing a lot of my own research, and at some point it became clear that Whitesbog Trust was the predominant organization after CESC left, and Pines was just an education organization and wasn't necessarily going to be involved in preservation of the buildings. Whitesbog took that as its mission, and I started doing a lot of historic research, and became the folk life coordinator. I actually have a picture of the bulletin board that we put up at one of the early blueberry festivals, saying Whitesbog Folk Life Committee. Do you remember life at Whitesbog? sort of like what you're doing now. And I even got a couple of interviews with some folks who had lived here in one of the, I think in Florence, as they had come as kids, were involved with the cranberry or probably mostly blueberry harvests. And I think I left a whole bunch of stuff when I was finished there at Whitesbog. So in the archives, I'm sure there are a couple of notebooks, some CDs and or CD-ROMs and some cassettes of those interviews and transcripts and that kind of stuff. But at any rate, my first official involvement, other than just being interested and wanting to find out more about the history, was to be asked to be on the board at Whitesbog Trust. So, and I don't remember the year. It was probably either at the end of our time living at Whitesbog. I was there until I was 40, so it's 87, maybe 88. We moved away and moved to Pine Hill. Oh yeah, okay. I'll say this. Probably, I think the most significant thing about Whitesbog, once upon a time, was that cranberry packing house in its prime. I guess it was built in 1899 thereabouts. At the time that when it was finished, it was the largest agricultural building ever built in New Jersey. It was the largest of its time, and probably for many years afterwards. And it was designed, and I don't know if Fenwick himself or J.J. White. I think it may have been J.J. White, who was also an amateur inventor, from what I gather. I think he's the one that invented the sorting machine, the cranberry sorting machine that they still use today based on the bounce factor of old John Webb. But he, I think, had enough engineering. I think he was an engineer in his spare time or his full-time job at Smithville, I think, from what I understand. I'm just sort of piecing it together as I talk. But as an engineer, he knew a lot about design. And he had designed the buildings with these big doors that could be propped up and let the air flow in. So basically, this huge, long building that was basically two stories of usable space. He could keep cranberries in there without refrigeration, without natural temperature control, or without manual temperature control. But he basically was able to engineer the building. It had a clear story at the top. They could open up those windows and let hot air go out, open up the side doors, big, awning type doors, prop them up, and they'd prop them up in the evening, I think, when the air got cooler, and let the cool air come in at the bottom, and as it heated up, it would rise out the top. So there was a flow of air naturally that flowed through the cranberries. The cranberries were in those big boxes. I don't remember what they called that size, but the cranberry bins that were probably about 3 feet long. You have some of those in your collection? Yeah. Those boxes were all designed, or they designed the building with these huge joists on the bottom floor and the top floor, second floor, with a little track running down the middle of both the first and second story, so they could bring the berries by wagon, get it to the center, and they had a little cart, sort of like a little railroad cart, that rolled on the track, and they could move those cranberry boxes and then pack them. They didn't really have a floor there, but they concreted the ground. They had a concrete sort of sub-basement. I probably have only scratched the surface, but Anyway, I there are a bunch of things that I left there that I donated there, and I hope they are still there. Or there are a bunch of notebooks that I put together when I was trying to do my research, and I have copies of stuff. I've turned it all electronic. I've thrown all my paper stuff away because it was all photocopies. But one of the things when I was doing my research, I'm not sure if I was even, I think I may have been there, it must have been near the end. I realized that the Library of Congress has a whole treasure trove of photographs of Whitesbog. And I'm pretty sure that I left copies, electronic copies on CDs. I don't know if they're accessible at this point or what, but are you aware of those in the American Folklife Center? There are tons of pictures of Florence and Rome, which was gone before most people ever saw it. There's only a couple of ruins in the little section that was Rome, but I'm pretty sure there are some photographs that show the buildings at Rome before it was bulldozed. I thought that was kind of interesting to know that it took us I don't know where I found out about it, but I think I may have just been looking at historical photographs from the Folklife Center or the Smithsonian and found out that they had a whole bunch. I don't think they even called it Whitesbog. They just said a cranberry village in Burlington County or something like that. But there were tons, and I made copies of them or I downloaded them all. So I have that. I'm trying to think what other things I've found over the years. I will say something. My wife doesn't want to be involved, but I think she played an interesting part in this. I mean, when I was talking about the two of us having been involved with Whitesbog, or living at Whitesbog, first of all, she was there during the transition between Conservation and Environmental Studies Center and Pines. And I don't know if this sign still exists. I'm going to see if I can share the screen.
And we still have that.
You still have that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I did that with my router and designed the sign and the logo for Pines when it first came into existence. And I don't think I ever signed it even on that, but it's probably in not as good shape as that. But that, for a short time, hung outside when Pines was basically at the or upstairs at the general store.